We recognize the double C logo from 100 meters away. Quote Marilyn Monroe saying, "At night I wear nothing but Chanel No. 5 and keep a little black dress as the ultimate wardrobe lifesaver." Coco Chanel became synonymous with luxury that looks effortlessly simple. But in the Abwehrs files, her name bears the stamp F7124, code name Westminster. She lived at the Ritz in Paris with intelligence officer Hans Günther von Dinklage, tried to use anti-Semitic laws to seize control of her business from her Jewish partners, the Wertheimers, and in 1943 launched Operation Model Heart. Through Madrid, she planned to persuade Winston Churchill to make a separate peace with Hitler. In 1944, when she was arrested for collaborating with the Germans, it was reportedly the intervention of either Churchill himself, according to one version, or the Duke of Westminster, according to another, that secured her release the very same day. All this from the same woman who in 1926 gave the world the little black dress, freed women's bodies from corsets, and made comfort fashionable for the first time. What will weigh heavier on the scales of history? The freedom she tailored for millions of women, or the deals she struck with the Nazis? At the beginning of the 20th century, women were still expected to tighten their waists to 45 centimeters and walk in tiny steps to avoid strain. It was Chanel who became one of the first to challenge this anachronism. In 1913, in her boutique in Deauville, Chanel began selling a collection of sportswear made from jersey, a material that at the time was used for men's underwear. The collection became a true revolution in the fashion world, changing women's relationship with themselves and their bodies. A woman didn't just look beautiful, she could breathe freely and control her movements. In 1921, the world discovered Chanel No. 5, a perfume without flowers on the label, without an ornate bottle, but with a scent that smelled like a woman. Then in 1926, another revolution in the fashion world. The little black dress appeared on the pages of Vogue. Journalists called it the Ford of fashion, equally accessible and timeless. The simple straight dress became the uniform of the new era. Chanel gave women practical, wearable beauty, an identity aligned with freedom and mobility. Yet behind this transformation was a woman whose instincts for control, survival, and self-preservation ran just as deep, and the turning point came in the 1930s. In 1935, workers at the House of Chanel went on strike. They demanded basic rights, fixed working hours. Chanel was notorious for keeping them around the clock. Improved conditions, fair wages, paid holidays. Chanel's response was swift and ruthless. She fired 300 people. The strike only ended after legal pressure forced her to concede. But she never forgot. Known for her vengefulness, she carried the resentment for years. At the same time, Chanel's cultural position was shifting. Modern fashion was moving in new directions, many of them championed by her rival, Elsa Schiaparelli. Artists, poets, and intellectuals, many with left-wing views, surrounded her, and she increasingly felt under siege. Paradoxically, as leftist ideals flourished in a social sphere, Chanel began drifting toward nationalism and expressing overt anti-Semitism. She reportedly said horrible things about Jews, yet continued to dress Jewish aristocrats like the Rothschilds. As contradictions piled up, Chanel moved closer to power in its darkest forms. When the Nazis invaded France in 1940, Chanel was one of the first fashion designers to shut down her business. Some attributed it to principle, a refusal to profit during wartime. Others believed it was a personal strike, punishment for the staff who had once dared to organize against her. She moved full-time into the Ritz Hotel in Paris, which became a de facto headquarters for the Nazi elite during the occupation. There, Chanel began a relationship with Hans Günther von Dinklage, a German officer, diplomat, and suspected intelligence operative. Their connection, though discreet, didn't go unnoticed. But unlike thousands of French women who were publicly humiliated after the war for fraternizing with the enemy, heads shaved, paraded through the streets marked with swastikas, Chanel faced no public reckoning. At first, her involvement may have been viewed as survival, but it didn't stop there. In 1943, Chanel took part in a murky high-level mission. She reached out to her old friend, Vera Bade, by then Vera Lombardi, having married an Italian fascist, and invited her to join a trip to Spain. Chanel had learned, reportedly through Gunther von Dinklage, that Churchill would be passing through Madrid after the Tehran conference. She wanted to meet him. The goal, to personally appeal for a separate peace between Britain and Nazi Germany. Her ties to Churchill stretched back decades to her long affair with the Duke of Westminster. But now, in 1943, Chanel's motivations were mixed. Some believe she was acting as a go-between for Nazi intelligence. She had reportedly traveled to Berlin for instructions from SS officer Walter Schellenberg. After the war, Chanel financially supported Schellenberg during his illness, and his widow, after his death, sent Chanel 2 unknown objects he had left behind. Some believe they were documents that could have exposed her wartime activity. In Madrid, the mission fell apart. Churchill never arrived. Chanel and Vera were detained. Vera accused Chanel of being a Nazi spy, and Chanel made the same accusation against Vera. Chanel was eventually released and returned to France, possibly after another stop in Berlin. In the end, Churchill intervened, and Vera was released as well. After France was liberated in 1944, Chanel was briefly arrested, questioned, and within hours released. No charges, no trial, no exile, no official explanation. How did she escape unscathed? Some say it was national respect. She was a cultural monument. Others point to Churchill, or perhaps the Duke of Westminster, as protectors who shielded her from justice. But France hadn't truly forgiven. Chanel was no longer welcome. Her name, once synonymous with style, had become toxic. Friends distances themselves. Her fashion house remained closed. She moved to Switzerland, where she lived quietly in isolation. "When I die," she said, "they'll need to call a policeman so I don't die alone." It wasn't until 1954, a full decade after the war, that Chanel staged her return. She reopened her fashion house and prepared a comeback collection. The atmosphere was electric. Journalists, buyers, dignitaries filled the room. Chanel thought she would reclaim her crown, crush Dior's extravagance, and restore her minimalist ethos. Instead, she showed designs that looked 15 to 20 years old. The crowd was silent. Some muttered polite words, most walked out. It was a complete failure. Her salvation came from an unexpected source, the Wertheimers, the Jewish family she had once tried to dispossess under Nazi property laws. During the war, they escaped to the United States of America, transferring their ownership in Chanel to a trusted friend, Felix Amiot. Chanel attempted to persuade Nazi officials that this was not genuine, that as Jewish people, the Wertheimers' assets should be confiscated and transferred to her. She failed, but after the war, the Wertheimers quietly resumed control and ultimately saved the brand. They funded her relaunch, marketed Chanel No. 5 globally, and kept the business afloat. Ironically, the Americans, not the French, brought Chanel back. Sales surged overseas. And when Marilyn Monroe uttered her now famous line, "What do I wear to bed?" just a few drops of Chanel No. 5. It cemented the perfume's place in cultural history. But while the brand thrived, the woman behind it continued to struggle. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Chanel kept working. She released collections. She had loyal clients, but her voice grew increasingly bitter. She despised the new generation designers like Dior and Balenciaga, the rise of miniskirts, the influence of gay men in fashion. How can they understand women if they don't love them, she once said. She mocked female knees, called modern trends vulgar, and rejected every aspect of the youth revolution. Still, she worked not for glory, but because she didn't know how to stop. But Chanel's time had passed. Until her death in 1971, She kept reworking the same silhouette she had created 45 years earlier. But despite the fact that Chanel couldn't embrace the new rules of the fashion world, she still remains one of the most significant figures of the 20th century. And her legacy, the House of Chanel, is one of the most powerful brands in the world. The scent of Chanel No. 5, the sharpness of a black blazer, the iconography of a little black dress, they all remain. But we should ask ourselves the question, can we separate the artist from their art? Should we truly cherish the legacy left by a woman whose biography is marked by dark chapters? Coco Chanel freed women from corsets, but tried to claim the property of Jewish business partners during Nazi occupation. She made fashion modern, but allied herself with a German officer tied to military intelligence. She taught generations to dress with elegance, but spent her final years consumed by bitterness and regret. She gave women movement, elegance, independence, but also left behind a legacy clouded by complicity and contradiction. Maybe we should ask ourselves, who are we when we admire a name without knowing its full story?